Kyle Tarver stood at the stove in the spacious kitchen of their Miami mansion, stirring pasta sauce. The pot sizzled, filling the air with the scent of tomatoes and basil. The stainless steel refrigerator hummed in the corner, and bowls of salad and sliced baguettes were piled high on the marble island. The ocean was dark outside, with only the lights of yachts glittering in the distance. Kyle wiped the sweat from his forehead with his shirt sleeve and glanced at his watch. It was 7 o'clock. Mira was late, as usual. "Darian, stop staring at your phone," he called over his shoulder. "Go set the table. Dinner's almost ready." Darian, the 16-year-old son, sat on the living room couch, staring at the screen. His sneakers were by the door and his backpack was on the floor. He snorted, not looking up. "Come on, Dad, 5 minutes," he muttered. "I'm in the game, I'll finish it now." "You can finish the game later," Kyle raised his voice, but without malice. "Celine came home from college. Let's have a normal evening." Darian rolled his eyes, but put his phone down and shuffled toward the kitchen. He grabbed plates from the cabinet and began setting them out on the island where they usually ate when it was just the four of them. "Celine, where are you?" Kyle called, trying the sauce with a spoon. "The pasta is ready." "Coming," came from above. Celine, the 18-year-old daughter, came down the stairs, adjusting her denim jacket. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and her headphones were dangling from her ears. "Smells great, Dad. You're like a chef." "Yeah, a chef without a Michelin star," Kyle grinned, setting the pot on the table. "Sit down before it gets cold." Celine plopped down on a chair, grabbing a piece of baguette. "Mom's not home again?" she asked, chewing. "Does she never come home anymore?" Kyle tensed, but tried not to show it. Mira had promised to be there by 6, but she was late for the third time this week. He pulled out his phone to check his messages, but her last one was that morning. "Going to be late, surgery." "She's at the clinic," he said, trying to sound casual. "Work, you know. Sit up straight, Darian, not like you're in a cave." Darian snorted but straightened up, throwing his fork onto his plate. "Work, yeah," he muttered. "She doesn't even know I won the match last week." "She knows." Kyle looked at his son, feeling a twinge of guilt. She's in a jam right now. You tell her at dinner, she'll be happy." "Yeah, if she comes at all." Celine rolled her eyes. "Dad, seriously, do you even talk to her? I came for the weekend, and she's like a ghost." Kyle opened his mouth, but found no words. He knew Celine was right. Mira had become distant not just from him, but from the kids. She had been a shadow these past months, leaving early, returning late, always with her phone in hand. Kyle chalked it up to stress. Heart surgery was no joke, but inside, he was growing restless. "She's coming," he said, putting the paste on. "Let's eat while it's hot. Celine, how's college? Already a biochemistry star?" "Well, almost." Celine smiled, but her eyes remained sad. "The lectures were great, but I almost failed the lab. And you, Darian, what about you? Still a football player or a blogger already?" "Ha, funny." Darian poked her with his fork. "Better than your debates. You'll argue everyone to death there." "Be jealous in silence." Celine stuck out her tongue, and they both laughed. Kyle watched them, feeling warmth. These moments, the kids joking, the kitchen buzzing with their voices, reminded him of why he worked. He'd built this house, this business, so they could have it all. But without Mira, the evening felt empty. The door slammed and Mira walked in, kicking off her shoes at the entrance. Her white robe was rumpled, her hair was disheveled, and there were shadows under her eyes. She dropped her bag on the couch and walked toward the kitchen, not looking at Kyle. "Sorry, I'm late," she said, sitting down. "It was a difficult case. We barely got the patient out." "Mom, are you at least eating properly?" Celine frowned, pushing a plate towards her. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." "I'm fine." Mira waved her hand, picking up her fork. "I'm just busy." "Kyle, is that your sauce?" "Yeah," Kyle nodded, but his eyes were on her. She didn't even ask how the kids were. How was the surgery? It's fine, Mira shrugged, picking at the paste. I don't want to bother you. What's new with you? I won the match. Darian looked at her, but his voice was even, almost indifferent. I scored a goal in overtime. Cool, Mira smiled, but her eyes were empty. Well done, Darian. Kyle clenched his jaw. She didn't even ask for details. Celine noticed, too, because she kicked Darian under the table, shaking her head as if to say, "Don't start." And I joined the debate club, Celine said, changing the subject. Yesterday, I tore apart a guy on ecology. Dad, you'd be proud. Of course, Kyle smiled, but his thoughts were on Mira. She sat with her nose on her plate, as if she were somewhere else. Mira, aren't you hungry? Not really. She put her fork down. I'm tired. I'll go lie down. Already? Celine jumped up, her voice shaking. Mom, I came for 2 days, and you won't even talk? What's wrong with you? Mira froze, her hand frozen on the table. Celine, don't start, she said, her tone sharp. I work so you can have this life. If you don't want to, I can quit and stay home. I don't give a damn about the house. Celine threw the napkin. I want you with us, not in your hospital. That's enough. Kyle stood up, his voice firm. Celine, sit down. Mira, please stay. Let's just eat. Mira looked at him, her eyes full of irritation, but she nodded and sat down. Dinner continued in silence, the only sound being the clanking of forks on plates. Darian was staring at his phone, Celine was picking at her salad, and Kyle felt the kitchen closing in on him. When the kids went upstairs, Kyle began to clear away the dishes. Mira sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. He saw the screen light up with a new message, but she quickly blocked it. Kyle came closer, drying his hands on a towel. Who writes? He asked, trying not to sound accusatory. A colleague. Mira shoved the phone into her bag. He asked about the shift. I'm going to bed, Kyle. She stood up and walked away, leaving her bag on the couch. Kyle watched her go, feeling something inside him break. He had known Mira for 20 years, and she had never felt so strange. He walked over to the bag, his hand hovering over the zipper. He didn't want to be the one going through his wife's things, but something told him he had to. Kyle opened his bag and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up without a password. Mira had forgotten to set one. At the top was a message from LK. Tomorrow at 8, as usual. Miss you. Kyle felt the blood pounding in his temples. He wanted to open the correspondence, but he heard Mira's footsteps on the stairs. He quickly put it down, put the phone back, and walked over to the sink, pretending to wash dishes. Mira came back, grabbed her bag, and went upstairs without a word. Kyle stood at the sink, clutching the sponge as water ran over his hands. He remembered how he and Mira had made this same sauce 10 years ago, laughing when Darian had smeared it all over the counter. They had been family then, strangers now. The text from LK stung like a burn. Who was this? A coworker? Something more? Kyle Tarver drove his truck down the Miami freeway, heading toward the soccer field where Darian was practicing. It was a hot morning, the pavement shuddering in the heat and the air conditioner in the car humming against the sun. Darian was sitting in the passenger seat, his head glued to his phone, his earbuds dangling from his neck. His uniform backpack was at his feet, and his sneakers had left muddy marks on the rug. Kyle glanced at his son, seeing him frown as he scrolled through his screen. After last night's dinner, where Mira had once again dismissed the kids, Kyle sensed that Darian was more withdrawn than usual. Hey, what's going on? Kyle asked as he pulled into the field's parking lot. TikToks again? Nothing, Darian shrugged, not looking up from his phone. Just a chat with the guys. Kyle parked, turned off the engine, and turned to face his son. Listen, Darian, he said, trying to sound casual. You were kind of quiet yesterday. Is everything okay? Yeah, fine, Darian pocketed the phone, but his voice was muffled. Just tired. Practice, school, all that. Kyle nodded, but he didn't believe it. He'd seen the way Darian had looked at Mira the night before when she'd gone to bed without even asking about his match. It had hurt his son, and Kyle felt guilty that he hadn't done something to make the evening better. If something's bothering you, just tell me. Kyle put his hand on the steering wheel. I'm always here, you know. I know, Dad. Darian opened the door, grabbing his backpack. I'll go, the coach will yell. He jumped out of the car and wandered toward the field where his comrades were already warming up. Kyle watched him go, his chest heavy. Darian wasn't one to open up easily, but Kyle knew that his son was suffering from Mira's coldness, and the message from LK that Kyle had seen on her phone was bothering him. He wanted to storm into the clinic, throw the phone at her, and demand the truth, but that would be stupid. He didn't want to fight in front of the kids. He needed the facts so he could figure out how to protect his family. The field was buzzing, the coach yelling commands, the whistle cutting through the air, dust rising from the players' sneakers. Kyle leaned against the hood, watching Darian lazily stretch. His movements were sluggish, without his usual excitement. Kyle remembered Darian jumping for joy after scoring his first league goal 2 years ago. Mira had been in the stands, screaming louder than anyone. Now she could barely remember when he had practice. Kyle pulled out his phone and dialed Mark Weiss, his lawyer. Mark answered on the second ring. Kyle, man, what's wrong? His voice was cheerful, with a slight rasp. Did the car break down, or is the business on fire? Neither. Kyle lowered his voice, looking back at the field. Personal. Can you meet me? We need to check on something. Wow, personal? Mark chuckled. Okay, come to the office in an hour. But I warn you, I charge a lot for family drama. Money's not a problem, Kyle said. Just be there. He put his phone away and looked at Darian, who was now running laps with the team. Kyle knew he had to tread carefully. If Mira was hiding something, he didn't want the kids to get hurt. Mark Weiss's office was in downtown Miami, on the 10th floor of an old skyscraper. The elevator creaked, it smelled of dust, and the city hummed outside. Car horns, street vendors, distant construction. The office was piled high with folders, there was cold coffee in a paper cup on the desk, and a fan hummed, circulating warm air. Mark, a balding man in a wrinkled shirt, sat at the desk, leafing through some papers. Well, spill it, he said, leaning back in his chair. What's so personal? Did Mira lose all her money at the casino or something? Kyle sat down opposite, throwing his keys on the table. Not a casino, he said, his voice even but tense. I found a message on her phone from someone called LK. Looks like more than just a colleague, and I want to check our accounts. Something tells me there's something fishy going on there. Mark whistled, adjusting his glasses. Really? He pulled out a notepad. Okay, let's take this in order. The message is one thing, but the finances are another. Do you have access to the joint account? Yeah, Kyle nodded. But I haven't looked at the records in ages. Mira always did that. I trusted her. Trusted, Mark chuckled, writing something down. Classic. Look, I can request statements for a couple of months. If she transferred money, we'll see. But Kyle, are you sure? If we start digging, something might come up that you don't want to know. I have to. Kyle clenched his fists. Not for myself. For the kids, Celine and Darian, they feel like Mira is leaving them. I don't want them to know anything bad, but I can't just sit there. Mark looked at him, his eyes becoming more serious. Got it, he said. I'll start today. I'll let you know if I find anything weird. But Kyle, one word of warning. If it's not just a text, but say, an affair or money, are you prepared for the consequences? Divorce, court, all that. Kyle gritted his teeth. The word divorce cut like a knife. He didn't want this. He wanted the Mira he loved, the one who laughed with the kids and held him at night. But that Mira was gone, and Kyle didn't know if she would come back. I'm ready, he said, although everything inside him screamed the opposite. Just find out what she's hiding. Will do, Mark nodded, closing the notebook. Give me a couple of days. And don't do anything stupid, like fight with her. If she's hiding something, it's better that she doesn't notice. Kyle nodded and stood up, taking his keys. He walked out of the office, feeling the Miami heat wash over him as the elevator doors opened. He got into his truck, but didn't start the engine. Instead, he watched the people walking by. Couples, families, kids with ice cream. His family was on edge, and he didn't know how to hold them together. Kyle remembered the time he and Mira had opened a joint account 15 years ago. They'd sat in a small apartment, drinking cheap wine, and Mira had laughed as she filled out the paperwork. "We're a team, Kyle," she'd said, kissing him. He'd believed they were forever then. Now he wasn't so sure. The text from LK might have been nothing, but Kyle sensed it was more. And if Mira was transferring money, it was worse than an affair. It was a betrayal of their family. He started the engine and drove back to the field to pick up Darian. Practice was ending, the players were leaving, and the coach was collecting cones. Darian was standing at the gate, wiping sweat from his face, his backpack slung over his shoulder. Kyle honked the horn, and his son trudged toward the car, still looking grim. "How did it go?" Kyle asked as Darian sat down. "Fine," Darian shrugged, looking out the window. "Scored a couple of goals." "Cool," Kyle smiled, but his heart sank. He wanted to hug his son, to tell him everything would be okay, but he couldn't. Not now, when he didn't know what was in store for their family. Kyle drove home, listening to Darian's silence, and thought about Mira. He'd trusted her for years, given her everything: his home, his business, his heart. But now he saw cracks he couldn't ignore. Kyle Tarver sat on the leather couch in the living room of their mansion, scrolling through the remote control. The screen flickered with the news, but Kyle wasn't listening. The ocean roared outside, and the room smelled of vanilla from the candles that Mira had lit the day before but forgotten to put out. The living room was their pride and joy, with its huge windows, wooden table, and paintings on the walls, but right now it felt empty. Darian was at practice, Mira hadn't returned from the clinic yet, and Kyle was waiting for a call from their lawyer, Mark Weiss, who was reviewing their accounts. With a text from LK on Mira's phone and Darian's despondency, Kyle couldn't sit still. He felt like their family was falling apart, and he wanted to know how bad it was. The phone vibrated on the coffee table. Kyle grabbed it, expecting Mark, but it was Celine. He answered, holding the phone to his ear. "Hi, honey," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "How are things at college?" "Dad, what's going on?" Celine's voice shook, as if she were holding back tears. "I just talked to a friend from Miami, and she said Mom is always with some doctor. Is that true?" Kyle froze, his fingers tightening around his phone. Rumors. He hadn't thought they'd reach Celine so quickly. "Celine, calm down," he said, getting up from the sofa. "Who told you this? You know how people love gossip." "Don't lie, Dad." She raised her voice, and Kyle heard a sob. "I saw a picture on Instagram, Mom with some guy in a restaurant. And you're silent? Do you even talk to her?" Kyle paced the living room, his sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floor. He wanted to tell the truth about the text from LK, about his suspicions, but Celine was too far away in California for him to hurt her over the phone. "We're talking," he said, his voice even but seething inside. "Mom works with a bunch of doctors, that's her job. Don't believe everything you see on the internet." "Yeah, work," Celine snorted, but her voice shook. "Then why does Darian write that she's never home? Dad, I'm not stupid. If you're getting a divorce, just tell me." "Nobody's getting divorced." Kyle clenched his jaw, his hand tightening on the remote. "Celine, listen. Mom and I are going through a rough patch. But I'll figure it out, I promise. Just study, okay?" "Figure it out," she sobbed. "I don't want this to fall apart. Call me when you find out something." She hung up and Kyle stood there, staring at the dark screen. His daughter was crying over rumors that were probably true. He felt helpless, like their family was drowning, and he couldn't find a life preserver. The door slammed and Mira walked in, dropping her bag on a chair. Her robe was unbuttoned, revealing a black blouse underneath, and her hair was pulled back into a messy bun. Kyle caught a whiff of her scent, not her usual perfume, but a sharp, men's cologne with hints of cedar. His stomach clenched. "Why are you so gloomy?" Mira walked to the sofa, taking off her shoes. "Problems in the salon." Celine called. Kyle turned to her, his voice low. "She's in tears. She heard rumors that you were hanging out with some doctor. What do you think?" Mira froze, her hand frozen on the armrest. "Gossip," she snorted, but her eyes darted to her bag. "Kyle, that's crazy. I work with coworkers, you know. Someone saw me at the cafe and blew it up." At the cafe, Kyle stepped closer, his gaze boring into hers. "Is that cologne from a coworker too? You smell like you've been hugging someone." Mira blushed, her fingers gripping the sofa. "Are you serious?" She jumped up, her voice sharp. "I've been in the or all day, Kyle. It could have been from a patient or an assistant. Stop making things up." "Make it up?" Kyle raised his voice, the remote falling out of his hand. "Celine is crying because you're always somewhere and not home. And I saw a message from someone called LK on your phone. Who is that, Mira?" She turned pale, but quickly pulled herself together. "A colleague," she snapped, grabbing her bag. "Levi Corso, neurosurgeon. We're working on a project." "Kyle, you're being paranoid." "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." She went upstairs, her bare feet clicking on the stairs. Kyle stayed in the living room, his fists clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. Levi Corso. The name burned like a burn. He wanted to run after her, to shake the truth out of her, but he knew that would only make things worse. Mira was lying, and he could feel it in every fiber of his being. Kyle sat down at the table, opened his laptop, and logged into their bank account. He hadn't checked the accounts in years. Mira had always handled the finances, and he trusted her. But now he flipped through the statements, his eyes darting over the numbers. $30,000 had left their joint account in the last 2 months. The transfers had been small, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000, all to one account labeled consulting. Kyle gritted his teeth. Consulting or something else? He closed the laptop, his hand shaking. 30 grand. Mira wasn't just dating Levi Corso. She was giving him their money. For what? Kyle didn't know, but this was worse than just an affair. This was a betrayal of their family, their children. He remembered their honeymoon 20 years ago. They were in a cheap motel in the Florida Keys, drinking wine from plastic cups, laughing about how they had no money. Myra had said, "We'll always be together, Kyle, rich or poor." He'd believed her. Now he felt like an idiot. She'd lied to his face, and he'd trusted her blindly. Kyle stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean. The candles on the table were burning low, their wax dripping onto the tablecloth. He thought about Celine, about her tears, about Darian, who had withdrawn. They didn't deserve this. Kyle didn't want to ruin their world, but he couldn't ignore the truth. Mark had to find more, and then he would decide what to do. He just hoped he could keep this from Celine until he figured it out. She was his girl, and he didn't want her to hate him for what he had uncovered. Kyle walked back to the couch, sat down, and stared at the phone. He wanted to call Celine to tell her everything would be okay, but he couldn't. Not when his marriage was sinking, and he didn't know how to save his family. He felt betrayed by Mira, but most of all, he felt the fear that he would lose his children. He had to act for them, even if it meant facing a truth he didn't want to know. Kyle Tarver walked down a path in a Miami park, holding a bottle of water. The heat was unbearable, the palm trees cast long shadows, and the air smelled of grass and sun. Children squealed on the playground, chasing each other. Their parents sat on benches, scrolling through their phones. Darian, in his black sweatshirt despite the 90-degree temperature, walked alongside him, kicking a rock. Kyle suggested that they take a walk after school to talk, but Darian was as sullen as a thundercloud. After the fight with Mira last night and her lie about the cologne, Kyle had not slept all night. And now he was waiting for a call from Mark's lawyer, who was looking into their accounts. But most of all, he was afraid for his son, who seemed to sense the discord between his parents in every cell. "Dad, why did we come here?" Darian stopped, crossing his arms. I could be hanging out with the boys. Because we need to talk. Kyle sat down on the bench, unscrewing the bottle cap. You've been acting like a hedgehog lately. What's going on, Darian? Nothing. Darian plopped down next to me, looking at the playground. It's just that everything pisses me off. School, training, my mom who's always somewhere. Kyle squeezed the bottle, feeling his son's words cut him. He knew Mira had distanced herself, but hearing it from Darian hurt more than he expected. Mom works, he said, trying to sound convincing. But I know that's no excuse. You're right, she's not home much. Not enough? Darian snorted, his voice full of sarcasm. She doesn't even know what I'm doing. Yesterday I asked when my next match was, and she didn't even know the season had started. Kyle looked at his son, his heart sinking. Darian was tall, almost as tall as his father, but now he looked like a little boy forgotten in the stands. Look, Kyle put a hand on his shoulder. Your mom and I are having problems. I'm not going to lie, things aren't going well. But it's not your fault, and I don't want you to be mad at her. Darian turned, his eyes narrowing. Problems? He raised his voice. Are you getting a divorce? Because she's always on that phone of hers, and you're walking around like a zombie. Kyle gritted his teeth. He didn't want to burden Darian, but he couldn't lie either. Not after seeing the 30,000 transfers on the statements. We're not getting a divorce, he said, though the word stung. But I understand what's going on. Just, don't blame Mom, okay? She loves you and Celine. Love? Darian jumped up, his fists clenched. She doesn't even notice I'm there, and you're defending her? What's wrong with you? Darian, sit down, Kyle raised his voice, but then softened. I'm not defending. I'm trying to hold this together. Give me time, son. I'll figure it out. Darian stared at him, then plopped back down, looking at the ground, his sneakers digging a hole in the sand. Okay, he muttered. Just don't lie to me, Dad. If it all falls apart, I want to know. I'm not lying, Kyle squeezed his shoulder. I promise. They sat in silence, listening to the children screaming and the honking of cars in the distance. Kyle could feel Darian shaking with anger, and he hated himself for not being able to fix everything. But he knew he had to find the truth, for his son, for Celine. Kyle returned to his office at the dealership, where the air conditioners hummed and the cars in the showroom gleamed under the lights. His office was on the second floor, overlooking the room where a salesman was chatting with a customer while showing off a blue Porsche. Kyle sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and checked his email. An email from Mark had arrived 10 minutes ago. Kyle, I have news. Call me. He dialed the number, his fingers drumming on the table. Mark answered immediately. Tarver, are you sitting? Mark's voice was businesslike, but with a note of alarm. I checked the accounts. You were right. Mira transferred money. 32,000 for 2 months, all to Levi Corso's account. Kyle felt the blood pounding in his temples. Levi Corso, he asked, clutching the phone. The neurosurgeon? Yeah, Mark coughed. Works at her clinic. The transfers are marked as consultations, but I dug around and there's no contracts. It's a personal account, Kyle. It looks like she's, well, you know. I see, Kyle gritted his teeth, his voice becoming hoarse. What else? That's all for now, Mark said. But I can dig deeper his finances, his correspondence with the bank. But Kyle, this isn't just money. If this is an affair, are you ready for that? Kyle closed his eyes, his hand tightening around his pen. Novel, the word he dreaded to hear. Dig, he said. I want to know everything. How much do you need? 5 pieces to start with, Mark chuckled. And advice, don't make a scene with Mira. If she catches on, it will be more difficult. Got it. Kyle transferred the money through the app. Keep me posted. He hung up and stared at his laptop screen. Levi Corso. The name Mira had thrown out yesterday as if it meant nothing. Kyle opened his browser, typed the name into the search bar, and clicked through to social media. Levi's profile was public. tall, neatly coiffed, wearing an expensive suit with a movie star smile. And then Kyle saw a photo of Levy and Mira at a restaurant, drinking wine, her hand on his shoulder. The caption, "Work dinner with my best coworker." Kyle felt his stomach clench. This wasn't dinner. This was an affair. He closed the laptop, his hands shaking. Mira wasn't just transferring money. She was cheating on him with that dude, and their kids were suffering because of it. Kyle wanted to storm in, throw the photo in her face, but he knew that would ruin everything. He had to be smarter for Darian and Celine. Kyle remembered Celine calling yesterday, crying over the rumors. She was thousands of miles away, but she could feel their family cracking. And Darian, his anger in the park had been a cry for help. Kyle couldn't let them find out the truth, the way he had through the photo, through the lies. He had to protect them, even if it meant keeping the anger inside. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the showroom. The customer had left. The salesman was scrolling through his phone. Kyle thought about the kids, the way they looked at him, searching for answers. He didn't want them to hate Mira, even if she deserved it. Darian was right, he couldn't lie. But he could give them hope while he dealt with the truth. Mark would find more, and then Kyle would decide how to strike. Not for revenge, but for family. He was just afraid the truth would tear them all apart. Kyle Tarver sat at a table in the Breeze Cafe on South Beach, sipping black coffee. The room was buzzing with the barista barking out orders, the clink of cups, and the honking of cars and laughing tourists outside. The air smelled of freshly ground beans and burnt croissants, and a ceiling fan lazily blew warm air. Kyle had chosen this place to meet Mira because it was public. She wouldn't make a scene in front of strangers. After seeing photos of Mira with Levi Corso on social media and learning from Mark about the 32 grand wire transfers, Kyle had decided to make a move. He wasn't going to accuse her of cheating on him that would scare her off. Instead, he wanted to pin her against the wall, hint at the money, and see how she would wriggle out of it. Mira was 10 minutes late. Kyle was scrolling through his phone, pretending to be busy, but his eyes kept drifting to the door. He was going over a plan, offered to split their joint account, citing financial transparency. If she panicked, then Mark was right, and the money was going to Levy. Kyle felt like a poker player, ready to show his cards, but only halfway. The door rang and Mira walked in, wearing a gray suit and carrying a shoulder bag. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, but there were shadows under her eyes that her makeup didn't hide. She sat down opposite him, tossing her bag onto the chair next to her. "Kyle, do I have to run around the cafe to talk now?" she said, her voice irritated. "I have an appointment in an hour." "It won't take long." Kyle put his phone down, looking her in the eye. "I spoke with Paul Ramirez, our consultant. He's offering to split the bill, just to be on the safe side." Mira froze, her fingers tightening on the strap of her bag. "Split the bill," she frowned, her tone sharp. "Why? We're fine." "Okay, but not perfect," Kyle shrugged, his voice calm, but inside he was jubilant. "I noticed some strange transfers. Small amounts, a bunch of them. You mentioned some projects at work. Maybe we should file this separately so we don't get confused." Mira turned pale, her eyes darting to the window as if she were looking for a way out. "It's for the clinic," she said, her voice shaking. "A research project. I told you, Kyle. Don't make a big deal out of it." "Research project." Kyle leaned closer, his gaze hardening. 30 grand, Mira, to some doctor's personal account. No papers. Do you think I'm blind?" Mira swallowed, her fingers drumming on the table. "You were spying on me," she raised her voice, but stopped short when she saw the couple at the next table turn around. "Kyle, that's low. I work so we can have this house, and you're snooping around in my business." "I'm digging because you're lying." Kyle lowered his voice, his eyes boring into hers. "Tell me about the project. Show me the papers, or sign the agreement and do whatever you want without my money." Mira stared at him, her breathing heavy. She grabbed her phone as if she wanted to text someone, but changed her mind. "Okay," she said finally, her voice quieter. The papers have arrived. But you're wrong, Kyle. You're ruining everything. Destroy? Kyle snorted, leaning back. Think about who started it. You have a week. Mira stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked out without even ordering a water. Kyle watched her through the window, watching her get into her car and drive away. She was panicking, and that meant he had hit the nail on the head. Mira wasn't just hiding an affair, she was involved in something that was costing their family tens of thousands. Kyle felt like a strategist, but the victory was bittersweet. He knew this was just the beginning. That evening, Kyle sat in the living room of the mansion, leafing through a car magazine. The candles on the table had burned out, leaving wax stains, and the ocean roared outside the windows. Darian was at a friend's house, and Mira had left for the night shift, although Kyle no longer believed her excuses. He was waiting for Celine, who had come home from college for the weekend, hoping to talk to her after she had called in tears. But he didn't expect her to burst into the house like a hurricane. "Dad, what are you doing?" Celine stood in the doorway, her backpack hanging off her shoulder, her eyes red. "Mom said you're blackmailing her with some bills. Are you trying to ruin everything?" Kyle put the magazine down, his heart sinking. "Celine, sit down," he said, getting up from the couch. "This isn't blackmail. I'm trying to figure out what's going on." "Sort it out?" She threw her backpack on the floor, her voice shaking. "You're digging into her affairs like some kind of detective. Mom works like crazy, and you only think about your money. You're selfish, Dad." Kyle gritted his teeth, his fists clenched. He wanted to tell her about Levy, about the photo, about the 32,000, but Celine couldn't find out like this. "I'm not selfish," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "I care about our family. Mom, she does things I don't understand. I'm trying to protect you and Darian." "Protect?" Celine snorted, her eyes filling with tears. "You're ruining everything. I came home, and there's a war. Why can't you just talk like normal people?" "We're talking." Kyle took a step toward her, but she backed away. "Celine, listen. I don't want to fight, but I can't turn a blind eye to what I see. Give me time, okay?" "Time?" She wiped her tears with her sleeve. "You and Mom have already decided everything, right? I don't want to be between you. I hate this." She turned and walked upstairs, slamming the door to her room. Kyle stood there, listening to the silence press in his ears. His daughter hated him, and that was worse than Mira's lies. He sat down on the couch, his hands falling into his lap. He felt like a strategist who had won a battle but lost a war. Mira was panicking, but Celine was hurting, and Kyle didn't know how to fix it. He remembered Celine, when she was 7, falling off her bike and bruising her knee. She cried, but she didn't want Kyle to carry her home. "I'll do it myself, Dad," she said, limping. He'd been proud of her stubbornness then. Now it hurt him because she'd protected Mira without knowing the truth. Kyle didn't want her to find out about Levy through social media or rumors. He had to find a way to tell her without destroying her world. Kyle stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark ocean. He thought about Darian, who asked him not to lie in the park, about Celine, who cried upstairs, about Mira, who lied to his face. He felt alone against everyone, but there was nowhere to retreat. Mark dug further, and Kyle knew that the truth was close. He was only afraid that it would tear their family apart. He wanted to regain control, but not at the cost of the children. He hoped that he could protect them, even if he lost Mira. But now he felt like he was losing everyone. Kyle Tarver stood on a Miami beach, squinting into the low sun. The sand was warm beneath his sneakers, the waves lapped at the shore, and seagulls screamed overhead. The air smelled of salt and sunscreen, and in the distance, tourists built castles and took pictures. But Kyle didn't notice them. His eyes were searching for Darian, who had skipped school after a fight with his friends. The principal had called an hour ago to say that Darian had left after lunch, leaving his backpack in the classroom. Kyle knew where his son might have gone. This beach was their childhood fishing spot. But now, after manipulating Mira at the cafe and lying about the project, Kyle was afraid that Darian blamed his parents for everything. He spotted him at the water's edge, sitting on the sand, wearing a black sweatshirt and jeans. Darian was throwing rocks into the waves, his shoulders hunched as if he were carrying the world. Kyle walked over, his sneakers crunching on the shells. "Hey," he said, sitting down next to her. "The director called, said you ran away. What happened?" Darian didn't answer, throwing another stone. His face was gloomy, his eyes were red, but he tried to hide it, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Darian, tell me." Kyle placed his hand on the sand, looking at his son. "I'm not leaving until you tell me." Darian finally looked at him, his voice shaking. "The kids at school are laughing, saying Mom's hanging out with some doctor. But I don't know what to say, because you're silent, and she's always lying." Kyle felt his heart tighten. Word had reached Darian, and it was worse than he had feared. He remembered the photo of Mira with Levi Corso, her hand on his shoulder, and his anger flared again. But this was his son, and Kyle couldn't let his anger get the better of him. "Son, listen," he said, trying to sound even. "I know this is shit. Your mom and I have problems, big ones, but you don't have to carry this. It's not your fault." "Problems?" Darian threw a rock so that it flew into the water. "You're getting a divorce, right? Because she's with someone else, and you hate her. Why don't you just tell her straight out?" Kyle gritted his teeth, his hand clenching in the sand. He didn't want to talk about the divorce, but Darian deserved the truth, or at least some of it. "We're not getting a divorce," he said, though each word was hard to get out. "But I understand what's going on. Mom, she's messed up. I don't hate her, Darian. I just want us to be a family." "Family?" Darian snorted, his eyes filling with tears. "What family, Dad? Celine's at college, Mom's somewhere. You're always in your salon. I'm alone, and I don't care what happens." Kyle felt his throat tighten. He could see Darian fighting back tears, and it tore at him. He moved closer, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You're not alone," he said, his voice firm. "I'm here, Darian, and Celine too. We won't leave you. I'll figure this out, I promise, but you have to trust me." Darian sniffled, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. He looked at his father, his eyes full of pain and hope. "You're not lying?" he asked quietly. "Because I don't want it to end." "I'm not lying." Kyle squeezed his shoulder. "We can do this. Together." They sat in silence, looking out at the waves. Darian was no longer crying, but his shoulders were shaking. Kyle felt their bond growing stronger, but he knew it was only the beginning. He had to protect his son, even if the truth about Mira tore their family apart. Kyle returned to Mark Weiss's office in downtown Miami. The elevator creaked as always, and the office was piled high with files and smelled of paper and old coffee. Mark was sitting at his desk, chewing on a toothpick and leafing through some documents. "Tarver, you look like you've run a marathon," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Is Mira throwing a circus again?" "Not her." Kyle sat up, rubbing his temples. "Darian ran away from school. Word of her affair got back to him. He's on edge, Mark." Mark frowned, removing the toothpick from his mouth. "Damn, that's bad," he said. "Okay, I have news, but it won't make your day. Levi Corso is a scammer. He's not just taking money from Mira. I found complaints from 2 other doctors. He swindled them out of their money for the same research project. No patents, nothing. Just a scam." Kyle felt the blood pounding in his temples. "How much did he take?" he asked, gripping the armrests. "Mira has 32 grand. Mark opened the folder. The others have about 50. He spends it on restaurants, cars, clothes. A classic swindler. I can file a complaint with the police, but it's up to you." Kyle gritted his teeth. Levi hadn't just slept with his wife, he'd robbed their family while Darian and Celine suffered. But Kyle didn't want the police until he'd talked to Mira. He had to give her a chance to explain herself, for the sake of the kids. "Don't file it yet," he said. "I want her to confess herself. Give me a couple of days." "Whatever you say," Mark shrugged. "But Kyle, if she knows he's a swindler, that's a different story. Are you ready for that?" I don't know. Kyle stood up, his voice hoarse. But I don't want Darian and Celine to find out on the news. How much do you need? 3 grand for now, Mark wrote something down. And keep a grip on yourself. If you start a war with Mira, the kids will be at the center. Kyle transferred the money over the phone and walked out, the Miami heat pressing on his shoulders. He got into the truck, but didn't start the engine. His thoughts were with Darian, with his tears on the beach. His son was on the edge, and Kyle knew he had to be there for him, even if the world was falling apart. Kyle remembered Darian at 5, catching his first fish on this same beach. He jumped for joy while Mira took pictures, laughing. They'd been a family then. Now Mira was with Levy, and Darian was crying because their house had become cold. Kyle hated her for it, but he didn't want her to hate him. He had to find a way to get the truth out without ruining Darian. Mark had given him a trump card. Levy was a con man, but Kyle didn't know how to use it without hurting the kids. He only knew that he wouldn't back down for his son, even if it meant losing everything. Kyle started the engine and drove home, thinking about Darian. He saw the pain in his eyes and promised himself that he wouldn't let his son drown. He was his father, and that was more important than his anger at Mira or his thirst for the truth. He was just afraid that the truth would be too much for both of them to bear. Kyle Tarver drove his truck down the highway toward the UCLA campus, where Celine was a student. It had taken most of the day to drive from Miami, the sun setting behind the palm trees, turning the sky orange. The interior smelled of leather and coffee from the cup Kyle had bought at the gas station. The radio played rock music softly, but he wasn't listening. His thoughts were with his daughter. After her accusations of selfishness and Darian's escape from the beach, Kyle couldn't talk on the phone anymore. He wanted to see Celine to explain that he wasn't the enemy, even if Mira was lying about Levy Corso and transferring their money to a con man. But he was afraid that Celine, in protecting her mother, would turn her back on him forever. The campus was noisy, students chatting as they walked along the paths, bikes jingling, and music from a dorm playing in the distance. The trees rustled, the lawns were strewn with fallen flowers, and the air smelled of grass and pizza from a nearby cafe. Kyle parked outside Celine's dorm, his heart pounding. He texted her, "I'm down here. Want to talk?" A minute later, she replied, "I'm coming down, just for a little while." Celine came out of the door, wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt with a backpack over her shoulder. Her blonde hair was down, but her face was frowning, her eyes red, as if she had been crying. She stopped a few meters away, crossing her arms. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she said, her voice cold. "I told you I have to study." I couldn't talk on the phone. Kyle took a step closer, but stopped when he saw her tense up. "Celine, we need to figure this out. You're angry, and I understand. But I'm not the enemy." "Not an enemy?" she snorted, her eyes flashing. "You're blackmailing Mom with some bills, digging into her affairs. She cried yesterday, Dad. She said you didn't trust her. Why can't you just leave her alone?" Kyle gritted his teeth, his fists clenched in his pockets. He wanted to tell her about Levy, about the 32,000, about his scam, but he knew Celine wouldn't believe him. Not now, when Mira had filled her head with her version. "I'm not blackmailing," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "I'm trying to protect our family. Mom, she does things I don't understand. I don't want fights, Celine. I want us to be together." "Together?" Celine raised her voice, her backpack slipping off her shoulder. "You're always in your salon, she's in the hospital, and Darian and I are like furniture. You started the war, Dad. Mom says you want to control everything. And I believe her." Kyle felt the blood rush to his face. Mira had turned Celine against him, and that was worse than her lies. "Celine, listen." He took a step toward her, his voice firmer. "I don't control it. I found transfers of a lot of money that Mom won't explain. I don't want to believe the rumors, but they're reaching you and Darian. Give me a chance to figure it out, please." Celine stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. Translations, she shook her head. "Mom said it was for work, and you immediately think the worst. Why don't you talk to her like a normal person? I don't want to choose between you, Dad. I don't want to either. Kyle softened, his throat tightening. You're my daughter, Celine. I love you. And I love Mom, too. But I can't close my eyes. Give me time, okay? I won't do anything to make things worse for you and Darian. Celine wiped her tears with her sleeve, her eyes full of pain. Time? She snorted. You've already broken everything. I don't know who to believe. Just leave me alone, Dad. She turned and walked away toward the dorms without looking back. Kyle watched her go, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. His daughter had chosen Mira, and it was tearing him apart. He wanted to run after her, but he knew that would only make it worse. He sat down on a bench, his head in his hands, and listened to the campus buzz around him. Celine was his girl, and now she was looking at him like he was the enemy. The next day, Kyle sat in his Miami dealership, in his second-floor office. The showroom below was gleaming, with cars lined up in rows, salespeople chatting with customers, and air conditioners humming, cooling the air. Kyle had a laptop on his desk, an empty coffee cup next to it. He was waiting for a call from Mark, who was digging further into Levi Corso. Kyle had been devastated by his conversation with Celine, but he couldn't stop. Darian, Celine, their family, it all depended on what he found. The phone rang and Kyle answered, holding the receiver to his ear. Tarver, I have an update. Mark's voice was businesslike but tense. Mira transferred more than we thought. 45,000 in 3 months. And that's not the end. I found another account where she sent money. To the same Levi Corso. Kyle felt the blood pounding in his temples. 45, he asked, his voice hoarse. What the hell, Mark? Did she just empty our entire account? Not all of it, but close, Mark coughed. I talked to the bank. The transfers were made under the guise of consultations, but it's a scam. Levy spends them on clothes, dinners, even renting a car. He's not just scamming Mira. I found 3 other doctors who got caught. Kyle, it's a scam. Kyle clenched his fists, his pen crunching in his hand. What should I do? He asked, looking at the showroom. If I push her, she'll run to him. And the kids. They're already on the edge. Don't push it yet, Mark said. I'm preparing the paperwork for a complaint, but you need to talk to her. Give her a chance to get her money back before it's too late. But Kyle, be prepared. If she knows he's a scammer, it's not just an affair. No, Kyle snorted, his voice hardening. She's in love, Mark. She's lying to me, to the kids, to everyone. How much do you want? 3 more, Mark chuckled. And keep a grip on yourself. If Celine and Darian find out, it'll be hell. Kyle transferred the money through the app and hung up. He stared at his laptop, where the tab with the photo of Mira and Levi was still open. 45 grand. Their money, their future, their family, all gone to this dude. Kyle wanted to rush into Mira's place, but he knew Mark was right. He had to give her a chance for the kids. Kyle remembered how Celine had made him a birthday card when he was 10, drawing a picture of their family. Him, Mira, her, and Darian on the beach. She had been proud of the drawing, and Kyle had kept it in a drawer. Now she hated it because she thought he was destroying their family. Kyle felt like he was losing her, and that was worse than Mira's betrayal. He had to earn her trust back, but he didn't know how, when the truth about Levi was so ugly. Kyle Tarver stood in Mira's office at the Miami clinic, clutching a folder of bank statements. The office was sterile, a white desk covered with papers and medical journals, a model heart on a shelf, and the air conditioning blaring outside, drowning out the honks of the cars outside. It smelled of hand sanitizer and her perfume, the same one she'd worn for years, but now Kyle detected something bitter in it. After his conversation with Celine on campus and the new information from Mark about the 45 grand wired to Levi Corso, Kyle couldn't wait. He was here to press Mira, to demand the money back, but without mentioning her affair. He wanted to see how far she would go with her lies, and he hoped he could hold back his anger for the sake of the children. Mira sat at the table in a blue robe, scrolling through her tablet. When she saw Kyle, she frowned and put the gadget down. Kyle, what are you doing here? Her voice was sharp. her eyes darting to the folder. I have a patient in 10 minutes. It won't take long. Kyle put the folder on the table, looking her in the eye. Explain it. 45,000 for 3 months, Mira. To Levi Corso. What the hell? Mira paled, her fingers tightening on the edge of the table. She opened the folder, ran her eyes over the statements, and Kyle noticed her hands shaking. It's for work, she said, her voice quiet but tense. Levi, he helped me with the project. Research, you know how expensive it is. Research, Kyle stepped closer, his voice hard. No contracts? On his own account? Mira, do you think I'm an idiot? 45 grand, and you didn't even tell me. Mira jumped up, her robe catching on a chair, almost knocking it over. Are you spying again? She raised her voice, her cheeks flushed. Kyle, this is my money too. Levi. He's not just a colleague. He helped me when I was at my lowest. I'm in a crisis, you know, and you're always in your salon. Kyle clenched his fists, his anger boiling, but her words about a crisis hit him like a slap. He could see the pain in her eyes, but he couldn't believe she was justifying stealing their money. Crisis? He snorted, his voice shaking. You're transferring our money to some fop because you're having a crisis? Mira, this isn't personal. This is our family. Darian and Celine are suffering while you feed Levy. Mira swallowed, her eyes filling with tears, but she straightened up, trying to pull herself together. You don't understand, she said, her voice quieter. Levi, he made me feel alive. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I'll give the money back, Kyle. The part, give me time. Part? Kyle slammed his fist on the table, papers flying. You stole 45 grand from us. Give it all back, Mira, or I'm going to the bank and the police. And don't lie to me about the projects anymore. Mira stared at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She grabbed the folder, crumpled the paper, and nodded. Okay, she whispered. I'll give it back. But you're ruining everything, Kyle. You don't see how much it hurts me. Kyle looked at her, his anger mixed with pity. He wanted to hate her, but he saw the woman he had loved for 20 years, now broken. But her lie was too deep, and he could not forgive. You have a week, he said, turning to the door, and don't you dare burden the children with your tears. He walked out, slamming the door, and down the clinic corridor, feeling the walls closing in. Mira was vulnerable, but her words about Levy burned like acid. She hadn't just cheated on him, she had given their future to a con man. Kyle Tarver stood at the edge of the Miami rink, watching Darian glide awkwardly across the ice. The cold air stung his cheeks, and the smell of frozen water and hot dogs from the cafeteria outside. The ice glistened under the lights, and children squealed as they fell, and teenagers chased each other, laughing. Music from the speakers drowned out the squeaking of skates, and fans hummed above the rink, blowing out cool air. Kyle had brought Darian here to take his mind off the pain of the argument he had overheard with Mira in her office. But Kyle's thoughts were with Celine, who hadn't answered his phone since their conversation on campus. He was afraid he had lost his daughter, protecting Mira, who had lied about Levi Corso and their money. Today, he wanted to be a father to Darian, even if his family was falling apart. Dad, let's go on the ice. Darian skated up to the edge, his cheeks flushed from the cold. His skates dangled from his feet, but he was grinning for the first time in a week. Or are you afraid of falling? Me? Afraid? Kyle grinned, tying the laces of his skates. I was skating when you were a kid. Yeah, and you probably feel like a sack, Darian chuckled, nudging his father with his elbow. Come on, show me your class. Kyle stepped onto the ice, his legs immediately sliding apart, but he held on by grabbing onto Darian. They both laughed, and Kyle felt a warmth that hadn't been there since their conversation on the beach. Darian was mad at Mira, but here on the rink he was just a son who wanted to have fun. Hey, how are you? Kyle asked, sliding in next to him. After what I heard at the clinic, is it too much for you? Darian shrugged, his smile fading, but he didn't look away. It is, he said, his voice quieter. I'm still mad at Mom. She's lying, Dad. But I don't want to think about it. You'll figure it out, right? Kyle nodded, his throat tightening. He could see Darian trying to be strong, and it made him proud, but it hurt. I'll figure it out, he said, clapping his son on the shoulder. Just be yourself, okay? And don't keep it inside. I'm always here for you. Yeah, I know, Darian grinned, but his eyes were serious. You're normal, Dad. Not like Mom. I don't want to talk to her. Kyle gritted his teeth, but didn't argue. Darian had every right to be angry, but Kyle didn't want his son to hate Mira. He knew she was confused, but her lies hurt them all. Come on, race to that corner, Kyle said, pointing to the far side of the court. Loser pays for the hot dogs. You got it, old man. Darian lunged forward, almost falling, and Kyle ran after him, laughing. They slid, elbows bumping, and Kyle felt their connection grow stronger. Darian was his rock, even if he didn't know it. Kyle returned to the dealership, leaving Darian with a friend. The showroom was buzzing. Cars were shiny, salespeople were chatting with customers, and the smell of new leather mingled with the coffee from the machine. Kyle sat in his office, staring at his phone. He had texted Celine, "Honey, let's talk. I don't want to fight." There was no response, just like yesterday. He felt like he was losing her, and it was worse than Mira's betrayal. The phone rang, and Kyle grabbed it, hoping it was Celine, but it was Mark Weiss. Tarver, I have news. Mark's voice was businesslike but tired. Levi Corso is a master swindler. I found 2 more doctors he ripped off. One lost 70 grand, the other 40. He promises them a share of the startup and then spends it on cars and clothes. Kyle clutched the phone, his fists turning white. More doctors? He asked, his voice hoarse. How much did he steal in total? Well, over 200,000, Mark chuckled. Mira is one of his targets. She transferred 45 grand, and I found another transfer for 5,000 last week. Kyle, she's still paying him. Kyle felt his anger boiling. Mira had promised to return the money, but she continued to lie, feeding Levi their savings. What next? He asked, tapping his pen on the table. Can I sue him? You can, Mark said. I'm filing a complaint, but you need to decide what's wrong with Mira. If she knows he's a scammer, she's an accomplice. If she doesn't, she's a victim. Talk to her, Kyle. Otherwise, the police will sort it out themselves. Got it. Kyle clenched his jaw. How much do you need? 2 grand, Mark coughed. And keep the kids away. If Celine or Darian finds out, it'll be worse. Kyle wired the money and hung up. He stared at his laptop, where the complaint against Levi was open. 200 grand. Levi hadn't just stolen from them, he'd destroyed families while Mira fed his lies. Kyle hated her for it, but he was afraid she was a victim, not an accomplice. The phone vibrated and Kyle grabbed it. A message from Celine. Dad, stop texting. Mom said you were spying on her. I don't want to talk to you. Kyle felt his heart sink. He dialed her number, but she hung up. After the first ring, he wrote, Celine, I'm not spying. I'm protecting us. Please let me explain. There was no answer. Kyle leaned back in his chair, his hands falling to the table. Celine turned away from him, believing Mira. This was worse than the money, worse than Levi's scam. His daughter hated him, and he didn't know how to get her back. Kyle Tarver sat in the visiting room of the Miami police station, clutching a plastic cup of water. The room was buzzing with phones ringing, officers shouting at each other, papers rustling on desks. It smelled of ink and sweat, and the air conditioner was blaring but doing little to keep the heat out. Across from Kyle sat Mark Weiss, his lawyer, leafing through a file containing the complaint against Levi Corso. After Kyle learned from Mark that Levi had swindled money from not only Mira, but other doctors as well, he had decided to file a complaint. The police had arrested Levi for fraud this morning, and Kyle had come in to sign the paperwork. He felt close to victory, but inside he was terrified. Celine wasn't talking to him, Darian was angry at Mira, and their family was falling apart. Tarver, how are you? Mark put the folder down, his glasses glinting under the lights. You look like you haven't slept in a week." "I haven't slept." Kyle took a sip of water, his voice hoarse. "Selin thinks I'm a traitor. Darian hates Mira. And now this Levy, how far has it gone?" Mark shrugged, taking a toothpick out of his pocket. "Far away," he said. "Levy was scamming doctors out of millions. Your complaint was the last straw. They caught him in his office today with a bunch of fake contracts. He's already testifying." Kyle squeezed the glass, the plastic crunching in his hand. "And Mira?" he asked, looking at Mark. "Is she involved in this?" "It doesn't look like it." Mark shook his head. "She's a victim, like the others. She wired him 45 grand, but she didn't know he was a scammer. The police want to talk to her, but I can keep her out of it if you want." Kyle nodded, his fists clenching. Victim. The word stung, but he didn't believe Mira was innocent. She'd lied about Levy, about the crisis, about the money, and now their children were paying for her mistakes. "Keep her away," he said. "I'll deal with her myself. What next?" "Sign this." Mark pushed the form forward. "A statement to the court. We can get some of the money back, but not all of it. And Kyle, be prepared, the press is already sniffing around. If Celine or Darian see the news, it won't be good." Kyle took the pen, his hand shaking. He signed, but he felt like it wasn't a victory, but a step toward the abyss. Levy was detained, but Kyle's family was on the brink. "Thanks, Mark," he said, standing up. "Let me know if anything comes up." "Hang in there, Tarver," Mark nodded, putting a toothpick in his mouth. "And talk to Mira before the police get here." Kyle walked out of the station, the Miami heat hitting him like a blow. He got into his truck, but didn't start the engine. His thoughts were with Mira. She had promised to pay him back, but she was still lying. Now Levy was in handcuffs, and Kyle had to make her tell the truth, for the sake of the children. That evening, Kyle sat in the living room of the mansion, on a leather sofa that creaked under his weight. The ocean roared outside the windows, and the room was dark. The candles had long since been removed, leaving wax stains on the table. Dorian was visiting a friend, Celine was at college, and Mira had just returned from the clinic. She stood by the door in a robe, her hair disheveled, her eyes red, as if she had been crying. "Kyle, I heard about Levy," she said, her voice shaking. "He was arrested. It was you, right? You filed a complaint?" Kyle stood up, his fists clenched. "What else could I do?" His voice was low, but full of anger. "You transferred 45,000 to him, Mira. Our money, our future. And you lied to me, to the children, to everyone. Who is he to you, Mira? Tell the truth, damn it." Mira stepped back, her hand clutching the doorframe. I didn't mean to," she sobbed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Levy, it was an affair, Kyle. He was there when you weren't. You were always in your salon, and I was drowning. He made me feel needed." Kyle felt the blood pounding in his temples. Roman. She had said it, and it was worse than he had feared. "Need?" He stepped towards her, his voice shaking. "You left us for some swindler. Darian hates you. Celine is crying, and you blame me? You stole from our family, Mira." Mira collapsed onto the sofa, her sobs filling the room. "I didn't know he was a fraud," she whispered, her hands covering her face. "He promised it was a project. I was blind, Kyle. I hate myself for it. But you were so far away. You didn't see me." Kyle looked at her, his anger mixed with pain. He saw her tears, but he couldn't forgive her. Not now, when their children were suffering. "I saw you," he said, his voice cold. "But you chose him. Give the money back, Mira, and think about how you'll explain this to the children." He turned to leave, but Mira grabbed his arm. "Kyle, please," her voice broke. "Don't ruin us. I'll do anything to fix this." Kyle pulled his hand away, his eyes full of anger. "You've already destroyed it," he said, and walked out, leaving her to cry. Kyle was sitting in his car outside his house when the phone rang. Celine. He answered, his heart skipping a beat. "Dad, are you happy?" Her voice was full of fury. "Mom called, said Levy was arrested because of you. You ruined everything. Why didn't you leave her alone? Kyle gripped the steering wheel, his fists turning white. Celine, listen, he said, trying to keep his voice even. Levy is a con man. He stole money from us, from other people. I was protecting our family. Family? She snorted, her voice shaking. You destroyed Mom. She's crying, and I don't know what to do. You're selfish, Dad. I don't want to see you. Celine, please. Kyle softened, his throat tightening. I didn't mean to. I love you and Darian. Let me explain when you've calmed down. Explain? She sobbed. It's over, Dad. Don't call me. She hung up and Kyle sat there, listening to the silence. His daughter hated him, and it was worse than Levy being arrested, worse than Mira's lies. He felt like he was losing everything he'd lived for. Kyle remembered their wedding 20 years ago. Mira had been in a simple dress, her eyes shining as she danced with him to cheap music. He had thought they were invincible then. Now their marriage was in ruins, and the children were paying the price. Kyle hated Mira for her affair, for her lies, but he also blamed himself for not noticing her crisis, for being distant. He had won the fight with Levy, but he lost his family, and this was not a victory, but a defeat. Kyle started the engine, but didn't drive. He looked at the house where Mira was crying, where Darian was angry, where Celine didn't want to know him anymore. He thought about the marriage he'd spent years building, and how it had fallen apart in months. Levy was behind bars, but that didn't bring his family back. Kyle knew he had to move on, for the sake of his children, but he didn't know how. He only hoped that Celine and Darian would forgive him when they saw the truth. Kyle Tarver stood in the middle of his new Miami apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes that smelled of dust and tape. The apartment was small, bare white walls, laminate flooring underfoot, a kitchen with a single microwave on the counter. He could see palm trees and a bit of the ocean through the window, but the silence in the room was oppressive, drowning out even the noise of the city. Kyle had moved in 3 days ago to give Mira space after she confessed to an affair with Levi Corso, and the con man was arrested. He felt like their mansion had become a cage, where every look from Mira was a reminder of her lies. But now, among the boxes and empty shelves, Kyle felt more alone than ever. Darian had been there for him, but Celine hadn't answered his calls, and Mira had tried to make peace with the kids, only making their pain worse. Kyle opened the box of dishes, pulled out a couple of plates, and put them in the cabinet. His phone was on the kitchen counter, the screen dark. He waited for a text from Celine, but he knew there would be none. After her angry call blaming him for Levy's arrest, she had gone silent. Kyle felt like he was losing his daughter, and that was worse than the emptiness of his new apartment. The doorbell rang loudly throughout the room. Kyle answered it, and there stood Darian, wearing his signature black hoodie and carrying a backpack over his shoulder. His sneakers were dirty and his face was grim, but his eyes were warm when he saw his father. "Dad, is this your new palace?" Darian stepped inside, looking around. "It looks like a warehouse." "Ha, funny," Kyle chuckled, clapping his son on the shoulder. "Come on in, the warehouse is open. Want some pizza? Only the microwave works." "Come on." Darian plopped down on the couch, which creaked under his weight. "Listen, I stopped by my mom's after school. She tried to talk again, but I don't want to see her." Kyle sat down next to her, his heart sinking. He knew Mira had called Darian, begging him to meet, but his son had been adamant after overhearing her lie about Levy. "What did she say?" Kyle asked, trying to sound neutral. "That she's sorry," Darian snorted, fiddling with a drawstring of his sweatshirt. "That she's confused, that she loves us. But I don't believe it, Dad. She lied about this Levy guy, and now she's crying like it's going to fix everything. I'd rather be with you." Kyle looked at his son, feeling warmth from his words, but also pain at his anger. Darian had chosen him, but that meant he had rejected Mira, and Kyle didn't know how to fix that. "Darian, she's your mother," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "She made a mistake, but she didn't mean to hurt you or Celine. Don't push her away completely, okay?" "Why are you defending her?" Darian raised his voice, his eyes flashing. She ditched us. Celine won't answer because her mom filled her head with her bullshit, and you're here alone in this hole because she broke everything. Kyle clenched his jaw, his hand falling on his son's shoulder. I'm not defending her, he said, but I don't want you to hate her. I need you, Darian, but she does too. Give her a chance when you're ready. Until then, I'm glad you're here. Darian sniffled, his anger fading, and he nodded. Okay, Dad, he muttered, but I'm staying with you. This couch is okay, I can sleep here. Kyle smiled, his throat tightening. He hugged his son, feeling their bond grow stronger, even in this empty apartment. Darian was his anchor, and Kyle knew he was worth fighting for. Kyle pulled into the driveway at Darian's school to pick him up after practice. The field was empty, except for the coach putting balls in the net. The heat was fading, the sun was setting, turning the sky pink. Kyle was leaning against the truck, waiting, when he saw Mira walking across the parking lot. Her car was parked nearby, her phone in her hand, her face pale, her eyes puffy. She spotted Kyle and stopped, as if to run. Kyle, she said, her voice weak. I tried to talk to Darian. He doesn't want to. And Celine doesn't either. They hate me. Kyle clenched his fists, his anger flaring, but he saw her pain, and that stopped him. They don't hate, he said, his voice cold. They're hurt, Mira. You lied to them, to me, to everyone. What did you expect? Mira sobbed, her hands clutching the phone. I didn't mean to, she whispered. I thought he was a mistake. I want to fix it, Kyle. Please help me talk to them. Kyle looked at her, his heart torn between anger and pity. He wanted to help, for the children's sake, but he couldn't forgive. It's not up to me to decide, he said. They'll choose when they're ready. And you, give the money back, Mira, and start with the truth. Mira nodded, her tears dripping onto the pavement. She walked away to her car, and Kyle watched her go, feeling empty. Darian walked out of the school, his backpack slung over his shoulder. He spotted Mira, but turned away, walking toward his truck. She's here again, he muttered, sitting up. She said she wanted to meet. I told her to leave me alone. Kyle started the engine, his hand gripping the steering wheel. Darian, she's your mother, he said, but his voice was tired. Don't cut her off completely. Think about it, okay? It doesn't matter, Darian stared at his phone, but his eyes were sad. I'm with you, Dad. Kyle nodded but didn't answer. He drove, feeling the gap between him and Mira growing, pulling the children down. Kyle Tarver stood at the fence of a racetrack on the outskirts of Miami, squinting against the sun that beat down on the asphalt. The roar of engines drowned out everything else as sports cars squealed around the corners, dust billowed in clouds, and the air smelled of burnt rubber and gasoline. Spectators in the stands screamed and waved flags, and mechanics in overalls bustled around the pits. Kyle had brought Darian here to spend the day together, away from the emptiness of his new apartment and the pain of their family. Ever since Darian had announced that he wanted to move in with him, rejecting Mira, Kyle had felt a mixture of relief and guilt. He was gaining a son but losing a wife, and Celine was still silent, cut off from him by her anger. Tonight, he wanted to make Darian feel like they were a team, even if their home was in ruins. Darian, wearing a black t-shirt and cap, stood nearby, his eyes shining as he watched the red Porsche speed down the highway. His backpack was at his feet, his sneakers were covered in dust. "Dad, it's fire," he shouted over the roar of the engine. "Can I try it? At least a lap?" "Dream on," Kyle grinned, clapping his son on the shoulder. "These cars aren't for beginners, but if you work hard in school, I'll let you drive mine in the showroom." "Really?" Darian turned, his face lighting up. "Don't talk shit, Dad. I'll start cramming algebra tomorrow." "Deal," Kyle laughed, but his heart sank. Darian was alive, real, and that gave him strength. "Listen, how are you feeling about this move? Are you sure you want to live with me? This apartment isn't a palace, you know." Darian shrugged, his smile fading, but he didn't look away. "I'm sure," he said, his voice firm. "With Mom, I can't, Dad. She lies, she cries, and then she lies again. I saw her calling someone yesterday, whispering, "I'm better with you. You don't talk nonsense." Kyle clenched his jaw, his hand on the fence. He knew Mira was trying to make peace with the kids, but her calls and pleas only pushed Darian away. Hearing her whispering to someone cut like a knife, but Kyle didn't want to burden his son. "I'm not a trinku," he said, looking into Darian's eyes. "You can always be with me, son. But Mom, she loves you. Don't cut her off completely, okay? Think about it." Darian snorted, kicking at the dust. "She broke it all herself. I'm with you, period. We can handle this, right?" Kyle nodded, his throat tight. He wrapped his arms around Darian, feeling his son pressed against him, and he knew this was the moment to live for. They stood at the side of the road as the cars roared, and Kyle felt their connection stronger than ever. Darian had chosen him, and this was his anchor. That evening, Kyle and Darian sat in the apartment, on the couch that creaked under their weight. The boxes were still piled in the corner, but there was a toaster in the kitchen now, and a pizza box smelling of pepperoni on the table. Darian scrolled through his phone, showing Kyle videos of the races, and Kyle laughed, feeling the apartment grow a little warmer. His son was here, with him, and that meant more than the mansion he'd left Mira. Kyle's phone rang, and he glanced at the screen. Mira. His stomach dropped, but he answered, stepping out onto the balcony where the wind whipped the palm trees outside. "Kyle, please." Mira's voice was weak, full of tears. "Is Darian there? He's not answering. I want to see him, and Celine too. Come home, I beg you. We can fix this." Kyle gripped the railing, his fists white. Her pleas were sincere, but he could hear the lies in every word. She had promised to return the money, but she kept whispering to someone. She had destroyed their family, and now she wanted him back. "Mira, that's enough." His voice was cold, but inside he was seething. "Darian chose me. Celine won't talk. You lied to us all, and now you're asking me to fix it. Give the money back like you promised, and give the kids time." "I'll pay you back," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I already transferred 10,000. Kyle, I didn't mean to. Levy, he was a mistake. I love you. Please give me a chance." Kyle closed his eyes, her words cutting like a knife. He wanted to believe that she loved them, but all he saw was Darian's pain, Celine's silence, his empty house. "A chance?" he snorted, his voice hard. "You missed it, Mira. I'm not going back. Darian is with me, and I won't let you hurt him again. Goodbye." He hung up the phone, ignoring her sobs, and returned to the apartment. Darian looked at him, his eyes serious. "Is this Mom?" he asked, putting the phone down. "What did you want?" "Talk to you." Kyle sat down next to her, his voice tired. "She's crying, Darian, but I said you decide for yourself." "I don't care." Darian shook his head. "I'm not ready. Maybe later, but not now." Kyle nodded, his hand on his son's shoulder. He could feel Darian growing, getting stronger, and it gave him hope. Kyle Tarver sat on a bench in a Miami park, feeling the damp grass stick to his sneakers from a recent watering. Children squealed on the playground, their sneakers squeaking as they raced down the slides. Palm trees swayed in the wind, their leaves rustling, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass and hot dogs from a nearby cart. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the gravel paths. Kyle rested his hands on his lap, his phone silent in his pocket. He waited for Celine, who had texted an hour earlier, heading to Miami. "Meet me at the park." After months of her silence, fueled by her anger over his role in Levi Corso's arrest, Kyle felt a mixture of hope and fear. Darian had moved in with him, their connection stronger than ever, but Celine's absence left a void he couldn't fill. Now that Mira was gone, Darian had mentioned that she was being treated for depression. Kyle wondered if his daughter would ever forgive him. Footsteps crunched on gravel, and Kyle looked up. Celine was standing a few feet away, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her blonde hair dangling from under her baseball cap. Her eyes were red and her face pale, but she didn't look angry, just tired, like she'd been carrying too much for too long. She dropped her backpack to the ground and sat down on the bench, leaving a small gap between them. "Dad," she said quietly, barely above the children's laughter. "Darian told me about Levy. Everything. I didn't know." Kyle felt his chest tighten, but he kept his hands still, afraid to scare her away. "What did he tell you?" he asked, trying to speak softly but firmly. Celine stared at the grass, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sweatshirt. "That Levy was a con man," she said, her voice breaking. "That he stole money from Mom, from other people. That she was with him, not just working. I thought it was your fault, Dad. I'm sorry." Kyle felt a lump in his throat, his eyes stinging. He wanted to hug her, but he waited, giving her space. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said, looking at her. "Your mother, she lied to all of us. I didn't want you to find out like this. I was trying to protect you and Darian." Celine's tears welled up, and she wiped them away with her sleeve, her shoulders shaking. "I believed her," she whispered. "She said you were a spy, that you didn't trust her. I was so angry with you, Dad. I thought you broke up our family. But it was her. And now she's gone, and I don't know what to do." Kyle moved closer, his hand hovering over her shoulder before dropping softly. "She's not gone forever," he said, his voice thick with pain. "Darian said she's being treated for depression. She made mistakes, Celine, big ones. But she's still your mother, and I'm here, always. You don't have to choose." Celine turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "But I chose her," she said, her voice breaking. "I pushed you away, Dad. I was such a fool. Can you forgive me?" Kyle felt his heart fill with warmth, and he pulled her into his arms, feeling her sobbing against his chest. Her baseball cap fell off, her hair tickled his chin, and he held her tightly, like they had when they were little. "There's nothing to forgive," he whispered, his own tears streaming down his face. "You're my girl, Celine. I love you. We'll figure this out together." They sat like that, her tears soaking his shirt, until she pulled away, sniffling but calmer. She gave him a small smile, and Kyle felt a weight lift, as if the park itself were breathing more freely. "Darian said you lived in some kind of squalid apartment," she said, wiping her eyes. "Is it really that bad?" Kyle chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Not a palace," he said, "but it's a home if you and Darian are there. Come and see. Stay the weekend." Celine nodded, her smile widening, and Kyle knew he had his daughter back. The park was buzzing around him, children laughing, palm trees rustling, and for the first time in months he felt hope. Back at the apartment, Kyle leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Celine unpack her backpack on the couch. The apartment felt more alive. Darian's soccer gear was strewn in the corner, a few framed pictures hung on the walls, and the coffee pot hummed on the counter, filling the air with a warm aroma. Darian was at practice, but with Celine here, the apartment felt full, her chatter about college mingling with the clink of dishes as Kyle washed them. His phone vibrated, and he saw a text from Darian. "Mom called. Said she was at some clinic. Didn't want to talk to her. You okay?" Kyle felt a sting in his chest. Mira was healing, and he felt guilty for cutting her off. But her lies about Levy, about the money, still stung. He said, "I'm fine. Celine's here. We'll talk later." He put the phone down and focused on Celine, who was leafing through the photo album she'd found in the box. "Dad, look," she said, holding up a photo of their family at a beach barbecue. "We were so happy. What happened?" Kyle wiped his hands and sat down next to her, looking at the photo. Mira was laughing, Darian was holding a crab, Celine was waving a spoon. His heart ached for those times, but he knew they would never return. "Life happened," he said quietly. "Your mother, she lost herself. I didn't notice in time. But we're here, you, me, Darian. Let's make new memories." Celine nodded, her eyes shining, and she leaned into him. Kyle hugged her, feeling the warmth, knowing that this was his family now. Later, as Celine dozed on the couch, Kyle checked his email. An email from Mark Weiss, his lawyer, confirmed that Mira had wired another 15 grand to their account with the note, "She's in a clinic in Orlando, says she's getting better." Kyle stared at the words, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Mira had tried, but the damage had been done. He didn't know if she would ever be a part of their lives again, but he accepted that their marriage was over. He just hoped that she will recover for the sake of Darian and Celine. Kyle remembered Celine, lost at the mall when she was 6. He found her crying by the fountain, clutching her teddy bear. He scooped her up, promising never to lose her again. Now that he had kept that promise, he felt like he had fulfilled it. She was here, forgiving him. Kyle Tarver stood in the center of his new Orlando showroom, surrounded by the buzz of the crowd and the gleam of the cars. The showroom was aglow, rows of Lamborghinis, Teslas, and Porsches gleaming under LED lights, the smell of new leather mingling with the champagne that waiters carried around on trays. Guests, businessmen, local rich men, journalists chatted and took photos of the cars, while music played on the speakers. Beyond the glass walls were palm trees and a sunset sky tinted orange. Kyle straightened his jacket, his heart pounding with pride. Opening the showroom had been his dream, and today it had come true, but not just because of him. Celine and Darian stood nearby, helping with the launch, their support making the day special. With Levi Corso arrested, Mira rehabilitated, and Celine reconciled, Kyle felt like his family was healing, even without his wife. But the past still tugged at him, and he knew that Mira had not disappeared completely. "Dad, you're a star," Darian grinned, nudging him with his elbow. His sneakers squeaked on the marble floor, and his black t-shirt stood out among the suits of the guests. "Seriously, this is cooler than your old salon." "Yeah, don't talk nonsense," Kyle laughed, clapping his son on the shoulder. "You helped with the advertising. Those Instagram posts of yours brought in half the crowd." "Well, I'm a genius," Darian winked, but his eyes were warm. "Celine, tell him I'm cool." Celine, in a blue dress, was scrolling through a tablet with a sales chart, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She looked up, rolling her eyes. "Don't get cocky, Darian," she said, but she smiled. "Dad, he's really great. And you, I'm proud of you. This is your day." Kyle looked at his daughter, his chest filling with warmth. Celine had come back to him, forgiven for the truth about Levi, and was now here, helping with the salon. Her pride meant more than all that glitter. "Thank you, honey," he said, his voice soft. "You both made this possible. I couldn't have done it without you." "Okay, enough with the snot," Darian chuckled, but his cheeks turned red. "Go, that guy in the suit wants to buy a Tesla. Don't miss out on the money." Kyle laughed and walked toward the client, feeling Celine and Darian watching him go. They were his family, his rock, and this salon was not only a business, but a symbol of their new start. That evening, Kyle returned to his Miami apartment, where the boxes had long since disappeared, replaced by furniture and family photos on the walls. The kitchen smelled of the pizza Darian had ordered, and his sneakers were on the couch. Celine was sitting at her desk, leafing through a biochemistry textbook, her laptop humming nearby. Kyle took off his jacket, feeling fatigue mingle with joy. The day had been a triumph, but his thoughts were with his family and with the letter he'd found in the mail from Mira. He sat down on the sofa, opening the envelope that lay on the table. The letter was handwritten. Mira's handwriting was trembling. The ink was smudged in places, as if from tears. "Kyle, I'm in a clinic in Orlando. I'm feeling better, but I know I ruined everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. Levi was a mistake, but my biggest mistake was the pain I caused you, Celine and Darian. I've paid back another 20,000. The rest is coming soon. I hope you're happy. I love you, even if I don't deserve to be with you. Peace." Kyle reread the letter, his fingers tightening around the paper. He felt a mixture of pity and anger. Mira had tried to fix it, but her words couldn't bring their marriage back. He accepted that she was gone, but he hoped she would recover for the sake of the children. "Dad, what's going on?" Celine looked up, noticing his face. "Something bad?" Kyle shook his head as he folded the letter. "From my mother," he said, his voice even. She's at the clinic and says she's better, says she's sorry. Celine frowned, her fingers hovering on the page. What do you think? She asked quietly. Do you believe her? I don't know. Kyle shrugged, his eyes tired. She's trying, but it won't bring back what was. I'm glad you and Darian are with me. That's the main thing. Celine nodded, her gaze softening. Me too, Dad, she said. You did it. We can do it. Darian walked in from the kitchen, munching on a slice of pizza. What's the chatter about? He asked, plopping down on the sofa. Did Mom call again? She wrote. Kyle showed the letter. She wants you to know she's sorry. Darian snorted, but his eyes were sad. Kyle smiled, feeling the warmth of their words. They were his family, and he knew they could handle it, even without Mira. Later, when the kids were asleep, Celine on the couch, Darian in his room, Kyle went out onto the balcony. He'd met Emma, Mark's girlfriend, at the salon opening that day. She was funny, her eyes warm, and their conversation hinted at something more. Kyle wasn't ready for a relationship, but her smile gave him hope that life was moving on. Kyle Tarver drove his truck down a Florida coastal road, heading for a beach on the Gulf Coast, far from the buzz of Miami. The waves crashed against the shore, their foam white in the light of the setting sun, painting the sky crimson and gold. The wind blew through the open windows, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed, and seagulls circled over the sand dunes, squawking into the air. Celine was in the front seat, scrolling through a playlist on her phone, her baseball cap askew. Darian was sprawled out in the back, his sneakers against the seat, his headphones dangling from his neck. They were going on vacation, their first in years, just the three of them, without Mira. Between opening a salon in Orlando, reconciling with Celine, and Darian moving in with Kyle, their family had begun to heal. Mira was a thing of the past, her letter of apologies sitting in a drawer, but Kyle felt ready to let her go. This vacation was their new beginning, and he wanted the children to see the future, not the shadows of the past. Dad, how much longer do we have to go? Darian stretched lazily, kicking the seat. I'm already fed up. Is the beach even okay? 10 minutes, don't whine, Kyle grinned, looking in the rearview mirror. The beach is awesome. Sand, waves, no crowds. You'll be building castles like you did when you were a kid. Yeah, I'd rather have a beer, Darian chuckled, but his eyes sparkled with anticipation. Dream on, racer, Celine rolled her eyes, switching the song to something rocky. Dad, he thinks he's an adult. Tell him beer is for old men like you. Hey, I'm not an old man, Kyle laughed, poking her in the shoulder. And you, Celine, don't show off. What's going on with college? Have you picked out an internship yet? Celine smiled, her fingers hovering over her phone. I think the lab is in Boston, she said, her voice full of enthusiasm. They do some cool genetic research. If they take me, I'll go there this summer. And you, Darian, what about you? Still a football player or a blogger now? Footballer, sis, Darian winked. Our season is coming soon. I'm already in the starting lineup. Dad, you'll come to the match, right? Not like Mom, who's always busy. Kyle nodded, his chest filling with warmth. He remembered how Mira had missed Darian's matches, citing work, and how it had hurt her son. Now Kyle was here, and he wasn't going to let him down. I will, he said, his voice firm. Front row, with the flag. Just don't screw this up, son. I'm a star, Darian grinned, but his eyes were grateful. Kyle watched the road, listening to their chatter, and felt that their family, though without Mira, was whole again. Celine and Darian were making plans, laughing, and this was his victory after months of pain caused by Mira's lies and Levi Corso's scam. They pulled up to the beach, the truck parked on the sandy shoulder. The waves roared as they crashed onto the shore. The setting sun was blinding, and the sand crunched under their sneakers. Kyle pulled out a cooler of drinks, Celine laid out a blanket, and Darian had already dropped his backpack and was running toward the water, ripping off his t-shirt. The last one in the water is a loser, he shouted, splashing Celine. Hey, idiot, Celine squealed, dropping her baseball cap and running after him. "Dad, come here, don't slow down." Kyle smiled, setting the cooler down on the blanket. He watched the children splash in the waves, their laughter drowning out the sound of the sea. This was their place, not Miami and its pain, but a clean beach where they could just be a family. He sat down on the blanket, opening a bottle of Coke, and pulled Mira's letter from the pocket he'd brought with him. He'd reread it in the apartment, but now, on the beach, the words seemed distant, like an old dream. Kyle thought about Mira, her tears, her lies, her affair with Levy. He hated her for the pain she had caused Celine and Darian, but now, looking at the children, he felt himself forgiving. Not for her, but for himself. Mira was in the hospital, struggling with depression, and he hoped she would find peace. But their marriage was dead, and Kyle accepted it the way one accepts a scar that no longer hurts. "Dad, why are you sitting there?" Celine ran up, wet, sand sticking to her feet. "Go swim before Darian drowns me." "Yeah, man, come on." Darian waved his hand, splashing water. "Or are you afraid of the waves?" "Old man," Kyle chuckled, standing up. "I'll show you who's the champion here." He kicked off his sneakers and ran toward the water, diving into the waves. The cold burned his skin, but the children's laughter warmed him. They pushed and splashed, and Kyle felt like this was their moment, their new life, without the shadows of the past. Later, they sat on a blanket, wrapped in towels, as the sunset faded, leaving the sky a deep blue. Celine munched on chips, Darian drank a Coke, and Kyle looked out at the horizon, where the stars were beginning to appear. The car was parked nearby, its headlights flashing when Kyle pressed the key fob. "Dad, that was awesome." Darian leaned back on the sand, his voice content. "We should hang out like this more often, without all the crap." "I agree," Celine nodded, her eyes shining. "But Dad, how are you? I know with Mom, things are complicated. Aren't you sad?" Kyle looked at his daughter, his heart clenching. She could see his pain, even through his smiles. "Sometimes I'm sad," he said honestly, his voice quiet. "But I'm happy with you. You're my everything. And Mom, I forgave her. She's trying to be a better person. Maybe one day you'll talk." "Maybe," Celine shrugged, but her voice was soft. "But I'm glad we're here. You're cool, Dad." "Yeah, fine," Darian chuckled, but his smile was sincere. "Just don't relax, old man. I'll score another goal at the match, and you'll be the one screaming louder than everyone else." "Deal," Kyle laughed, his eyes warm. "I'll be there with the flag." They fell silent, listening to the waves, and Kyle felt a peace he hadn't felt in years. He thought about Mira, about her letter, about her pain. He forgave her, not for her sake, but for his own, so he could move on. His family was here, Celine dreaming of Boston, Darian preparing for the games, and that was enough. Kyle remembered taking his children to this same beach with Mira 10 years ago. Celine was collecting shells, Darian was digging a hole, and Mira was laughing as she took pictures of them. He had thought their happiness would last forever. Now he knew that happiness was fragile, but it could be rebuilt. Celine and Darian were his new horizon, and he was ready for this life. Kyle stood, looking out at the ocean, the stars reflected in the water. Celine and Darian chatted behind him, their laughter mixing with the sound of the waves. He felt cathartic, as if the waves had washed away his pain. He had found a family and peace, and the reader rejoiced in his journey, watching him look out at the sunset, ready for a new life. Kyle knew there would be challenges ahead, but with his children by his side, he was unstoppable. He turned to them, smiling, and said, "Well, home, or another lap in the waves?" "Waves!" Darian jumped up, dragging Celine by the hand. Kyle ran after them, laughing, and the ocean accepted them as old friends. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.